Australia is one of the oldest continents on Earth. Its red desert floors have been baking under the sun for longer than most civilizations have existed. And yet, scattered across that ancient landscape, there are structures that refuse to be explained. Stone arrangements that align with celestial events no one has been able to date with certainty. Walls that predate the accepted arrival of any tool-using culture. Carvings cut into rock faces that match symbols found on the other side of the planet, in places that should have had no contact with Australia for tens of thousands of years. Archaeologists debate these sites carefully. Some dismiss them outright. Others go quiet when the questions get specific enough. And the communities, whose ancestors built some of these things, have been saying for generations that the academic explanations are wrong, that the story is older and stranger than anyone in a university wants to admit. Today, we are going inside 10 of those sites. 10 ancient structures across Australia that have no clean explanation, no agreed upon origin, no settled answer, just stone and time, and a mystery that keeps getting deeper the closer you look. If you find yourself drawn to places like this, hit subscribe. Every week, we go into Australia's strangest and most forgotten corners. Now, let's get into it. We start in the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales, in a place called Carryong. Carved into a sandstone cliff face, hidden behind thick scrub in the Brisbane Water National Park, is a set of more than 300 rock carvings that do not look like anything else in Australia. They are arranged in two parallel columns. They are not circular or abstract, the way most Australian rock art tends to be. They are shaped like birds, like standing figures, like boats with curved prows. And some of them look unmistakably like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is the Gosford glyphs, and it has been dividing people since a local historian first documented it in the 1970s. The mainstream archaeological position is that the carvings are modern, a forgery. Someone with access to a hieroglyphic reference book and too much time spent cutting symbols into the cliff face sometime in the 20th century. That would explain the Egyptian appearance and the lack of any credible radiocarbon dating of the carvings themselves. But there are problems with that explanation. The sandstone around the carvings shows weathering patterns consistent with significant age. Some researchers who have studied the site say the erosion cannot be faked and that it points to the carvings being hundreds of years old at minimum. The vegetation and root systems growing into some of the carvings also suggest considerable time has passed. And the layout itself, the parallel columns, the systematic arrangement, is not what you would expect from a casual forger trying to create a mystery. It looks deliberate in a way that takes real planning. A professor from Cairo University named Abdel Halim Noor el-Din visited the site and said the hieroglyphics were genuine and ancient. An Australian linguist named Ray Johnson spent years arguing the glyphs tell a coherent story in an archaic dialect of Old Kingdom Egyptian, a story about two princes who sailed south and one of them died in the voyage. Critics said Johnson's translation was based on errors and wishful thinking. Johnson said critics had not looked carefully enough. The site was partially vandalized in 2014, and that damaged portions of the carvings and muddied the ongoing debate even further. What we are left with is a set of carvings that should not exist here, which may or may not be ancient, which may or may not tell a story in a language from the other side of the world, sitting in a sandstone gully in New South Wales with no consensus and no closure. We move now to the South Australian Outback, to a formation that gets almost no media coverage, despite being one of the most genuinely baffling physical structures on the continent. Near Lake Eyre, in the remote northwest of the state, there are stone walls. Not single rocks or scattered boulders, walls, arranged in long straight lines that extend for hundreds of meters across terrain that gives no obvious reason for their existence. Aboriginal communities in the region have referred to these formations for generations. They are sometimes called the Walls of China, though that name belongs to a different site in New South Wales and causes ongoing confusion. The South Australian stone lines are different. Some of them appear to curve. Some branch at angles. Some seem to funnel toward low points in the landscape, which has led certain researchers to suggest they were used for directing game, channeling kangaroos or other animals toward hunters waiting at one end. That is the most common non-mysterious explanation, and it is plausible enough that it satisfies most people who encounter the structures for the first time. But the scale is the problem. Some of these wall systems extend for distances that would require enormous coordinated effort to build, far more than a small hunting group would need or be capable of organizing. And certain sections appear to serve no functional purpose for hunting at all, running across ridgelines or open flat ground where no natural funneling would occur. The dating question is where it gets strange, because these are dry stacked stone walls with no mortar and no organic material incorporated into them. Radiocarbon dating is not possible. Luminescence dating of sediment trapped beneath some of the stones has given results that push certain sections of similar wall systems in Australia back tens of thousands of years, far beyond what most models of organised human activity on the continent would predict. Those results are disputed, but they have not been cleanly refuted either. Moving to the Pilbara region of Western Australia, there is a site that most Australians have never heard of, despite it being one of the largest and most complex rock art repositories on Earth. The Murujuga petroglyphs, also known as the Burrup Peninsula rock art, are a collection of carvings on rocks spread across a coastal peninsula north of Karratha. Researchers estimate there may be more than 1 million individual carvings across the site. 1 million. The images include animals that are now extinct, thylacines, animals that look like megafauna species that disappeared from Australia somewhere between 10,000 and 46,000 years ago, depending on which extinction estimates you trust. If those images are accurate depictions of living animals that the artists had actually seen, and not stylized representations of creatures known only through oral tradition or bone, then some of these carvings are extraordinarily old. There are also images that researchers cannot identify, figures that do not correspond to any known Australian animal, living or extinct. Geometric patterns of a sophistication that sits uncomfortably with the conventional picture of what life on the Burrup Peninsula looked like tens of thousands of years ago. Some of the images appear to show scenes, figures in relation to each other, doing things, not just isolated portraits of animals or abstract designs. The site has survived extraordinarily well because the Pilbara's dry climate and the hardness of the rock have protected the carvings from erosion. What has not protected it is industrial development. A petrochemical plant has been built in the area, and air pollution from the facility is accelerating the weathering of the carvings. Aboriginal custodians of the site have campaigned for stronger protections for decades. The research community agrees the site is of global significance. The destruction continues anyway. What makes Murujuga relevant to our topic tonight is not just its scale, but its age. If the megafauna images are what they appear to be, then we are looking at an artistic tradition with a continuous history stretching back further than the Lascaux cave paintings in France, further than Chauvet, possibly as far back as any confirmed human artistic expression anywhere on the planet. And within that tradition, there remain images that no one can explain. Now, we travel to the tablelands of Queensland, to a place called Nungan, near Glasshouse Mountains. This is not a famous site. It does not appear in tourist brochures, but local researchers and members of the Jinnaburra people have documented something unusual here for years. Scattered across the basalt fields around the mountain, there are stone arrangements, circles, lines, cleared areas that seem to have been deliberately flattened. The basalt itself is dark and heavy, not easy to move, and the arrangements require movement of stones that would have taken significant effort. The standard archaeological category for these kinds of formations in Australia is bora rings, ceremonial grounds used for initiation and other cultural practices. Many such sites exist across Queensland and New South Wales, and they are well documented. But certain researchers who have surveyed the Nungan formations argue that some of what they are seeing does not fit neatly into the bora ring category. The alignments are different. Some of the stone lines point toward horizon positions that correspond to solar and lunar events, a pattern more consistent with astronomical observation than with initiation ceremonies as they are typically described. Celestial alignment in Indigenous Australian sites is not a new or fringe idea. The Wurdi Yuwang stone arrangement in Victoria is one of the best documented examples. It is an egg-shaped formation of basalt stones with outlier stones that align with the solstice, sunset, and with equinox positions. Duane Hamaka and other researchers in the field of cultural astronomy have spent years mapping the sophisticated astronomical knowledge embedded in Indigenous Australian traditions across the continent. The sky knowledge is real, and it is old. What makes some researchers uneasy is the question of how old, and whether the physical structures that encode that knowledge are as ancient as the knowledge itself, or whether they are relatively recent reconstructions of older traditions. From Queensland, we go to Victoria, to a site that has been documented far more carefully than most of what we have discussed so far. Near the town of Dunkeld, on a property that has been partially surveyed by archaeologists, there is a complex of stone arrangements that includes walls, terraces, and what appear to be fish traps or eel traps connected to a waterway system. The Budj Bim cultural landscape near Haywood has made international headlines in recent years because the eel traps there have been dated to approximately 6,600 years ago. 6,600 years. That makes the Budj Bim aquaculture system older than the Egyptian pyramids. It is the oldest known aquaculture system anywhere in the world. UNESCO recognized Budj Bim as a World Heritage Site in 2019, which means this particular site is not obscure or contested in the way some of the others we are discussing tonight happen to be. The Gunditj Mara people built this system, and their descendants maintain a direct connection to the site today. The knowledge of how to read it has never been entirely lost, but Budj Bim raises a question that matters for everything else on this list. If a 6,600-year-old engineered aquaculture system existed in Victoria, what else might have been built across Australia during that same period that we have not found yet, or that we have found but not recognised for what it is? The continent is large, and archaeological survey coverage is thin. What Budj Bim proves is not just that this one system is ancient, but that the capacity for large-scale organised construction existed here far earlier than most popular accounts of Australian prehistory suggest. Going deeper into Victoria now, to a set of sites around Lake Bolac and the surrounding volcanic plains. This region has been the subject of ongoing research by a team of researchers that includes Aboriginal knowledge holders and non-Indigenous scientists working together. What they have been mapping is a network of stone arrangements across the plains that is far larger than any individual site. Hundreds of individual formations, connected by landscape features, following patterns that seem to encode information about water flow, seasonal animal movement, and astronomical cycles, all at once. The sheer geographic extent of what they are finding challenges the idea that pre-contact Australia was populated by small, isolated groups living subsistence lives with minimal infrastructure. What the evidence on the ground suggests instead is something closer to a managed landscape, a country that was actively shaped by its human inhabitants across enormous timescales, using methods that were sophisticated enough to last. That reframing is uncomfortable for some and liberating for others. It does not require ancient contact with other civilizations or lost technologies. It requires only taking seriously what the physical evidence and indigenous knowledge systems are both saying, which is that the human history of this continent is longer, more complex, and more organized than it has been given credit for. In South Australia, along the Fleurieu Peninsula, local historians and members of the Ngarrindjeri people have identified a series of coastal stone formations that do not fit the conventional categories. They are not borer rings. They are not fish traps. They are not the kind of midden sites you would expect from coastal communities. Accumulations of shells and bones from meals eaten over generations. They are walls and alignments that face the sea, positioned at heights and angles that only make sense if the sea level when they were built was significantly lower than it is today. This is a critical point. Sea levels around Australia were dramatically lower during the last ice age. At the peak of glaciation, roughly 20,000 years ago, the coastline of Australia extended far beyond where it sits today. Land that is now underwater was once dry ground, and people lived on it. Oral traditions from coastal Aboriginal communities across the continent describe a time when the sea was much farther away. Some researchers working in the field of geological linguistics have argued that these traditions preserve accurate memories of sea level rise events that happened thousands of years ago, making them among the oldest accurate geographical memories in the world. If coastal stone structures were built on land that is now submerged, we would only find them through underwater archaeology, a field that is chronically underfunded in Australia. Some limited survey work has been done off the coast of Western Australia, where submerged stone features have been identified in shallow coastal waters. These features have not been conclusively dated or identified, but their existence raises the possibility that the built heritage of ancient Australia extends far below the current waterline, and that most of it has never been investigated. In Western Australia, near Esperance, on the southern coast, there is a site called the Esperance Stone Arrangements that has been described by various researchers over the decades without ever attracting the sustained investigation it seems to deserve. The arrangements consist of large stones placed in patterns across open ground, some suggesting circles, others suggesting lines. The local Aboriginal community, the Nungan people, have knowledge of the site, but the specific ceremonial or functional purpose of these particular formations has not been extensively documented in the public record. What makes the Esperance formations notable for our purposes is a survey done in the early 2000s that used ground-penetrating radar to look beneath the soil surface around several of the standing stones. The radar returns suggested that some of the stones had been placed in prepared holes, not just rested on the surface. The holes appeared to have been dug and then packed with material to hold the stones upright. That is a level of intentional construction that implies planning, tools, and time. It is not what you would associate with a temporary or improvised activity. The survey results were filed in a regional heritage report and then essentially forgotten. No follow-up investigation was funded. The site sits on private farmland, which complicates any access. The stone arrangements themselves are vulnerable to agricultural activity, and so another site that might have answered some significant questions remains in suspension, studied just enough to raise more questions and not enough to answer any of them. On the far north coast of the Northern Territory, accessible only by boat or by a long journey through country that discourages casual visitors, there is a rock shelter site called Nawala Gabarnmang. It was formally investigated beginning in 2011, and the results were startling. The shelter contains charcoal from what appears to be a deliberately lit fire that has been dated to approximately 45,000 to 50,000 years ago. That would place it among the earliest confirmed evidence of human presence in Australia, and the site shows evidence of continuous use across that entire span of time. What makes Nawala Gabarnmang relevant beyond its extraordinary age is its architecture. The ceiling of the shelter has been modified. Columns of rock have been removed, transforming a natural overhang into a more open and usable space. This is deliberate structural modification of the environment, not just use of a convenient natural feature. People reshaped this space to better suit their needs, and they did it so long ago that the date challenges the conventional timeline of when complex, organized human behavior was thought to have emerged. The implications of a 45,000-year-old modified rock shelter extend beyond Australia. They feed into a broader reassessment happening across the field of human prehistory, in which the cognitive and organizational capacities of early modern humans are being pushed further and further back in time. What seemed like exclusively recent capabilities, the capacity to plan, to modify the environment, to maintain a place and return to it across generations, turns out to have been present far earlier than anyone expected. The 10th site on our list tonight is the most general, and in some ways the most significant. Across the Central Desert, from the Western Australian goldfields through the Northern Territory and into South Australia, there are landscape features that researchers are increasingly recognising as the remnants of a water management system, not natural drainage. Managed water flow, channels, stone banks, and catch basins that appear to be arranged to slow water movement across flat terrain, to spread it rather than let it run off, to encourage it to sink into the ground and recharge the subsurface water that desert communities depend on. The researchers describing these features are careful. They do not claim ancient civilization or lost technology. They claim something more modest, and in many ways more interesting. They claim that the people of the Central Desert were environmental engineers, working at a landscape scale across thousands of years, using detailed knowledge of how water moves and how to redirect it to make their country more livable. This is not incompatible with a mobile lifestyle. In fact, it requires one. You have to understand a landscape across its seasonal variations, across its drought years and its flood years, to know how to shape it in ways that pay off over generations. The people who built these features were not settling in one place. They were managing a country they moved through, leaving it more useful than they found it, in ways that benefited every group that came after them. We have spent tonight looking at 10 sites. We have gone from inscribed sandstone cliffs that might be in an ancient language, to submerged coastal structures that predate anything written in history books, to modified rock shelters that were in use before the last ice age, to desert landscape features that suggest continent-wide environmental management across timescales that strain the imagination. None of these sites has a clean explanation. Some of them have contested explanations. Some have barely been investigated at all. And the thread that runs through all of them is the same uncomfortable realization that the human history of Australia is very long, and that for most of that length, the people living here were doing things we do not yet have the frameworks to fully understand. The questions these sites raise are real questions. They deserve real investigation, serious funding, and the kind of sustained attention that other continents have given their ancient structures for centuries. And the people whose ancestors built them deserve to have that history told accurately, including the parts that do not fit comfortably into the stories we've been telling so far. The continent has more to say. The question is whether we are finally ready to listen to all of it.